She boarded Flight 22087, as a face no one sees. Seat 112F, invisible in plain sight. Then the cabin went silent when an overhead voice spoke, a call sign everyone thought dead. The pilots flinched. The system froze. In that moment, the black woman in 12F became the one they feared and needed. A name resurfaced in the skies. Valkyrie 1. Who sent the command, and why was she suddenly the only person who could save them? Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. At 36, Aria James had mastered invisibility, not by choice but by necessity. She moved like water through spaces not built for her. Corporate lobbies, government buildings, airport terminals, never too loud, never too opinionated, never asking more than she was offered. And when she boarded Flight 22087 from Atlanta to Washington, D.C., at Gate C-112, she did what she always did, took up as little space as possible. Her seat, 12, a middle-aged white couple in 12D and 12E, glanced briefly at her, before returning to their conversation about vineyard tours in Charlottesville. Aria offered a polite nod, folding herself into the narrow seat as if she were somehow too large for the space. She wasn't. She simply knew how the world preferred her. Smaller, quieter, contained. She placed her brown leather satchel under the seat, one hand brushing its frayed corner where a once gold Air Force emblem had nearly rubbed off. She hesitated, then zipped it shut. Outside the window, airport crew moved with mechanical precision. The sun washed the tarmac in a dull orange haze. The intercom crackled. Passengers barely noticed as the flight crew's rehearsed welcome echoed overhead. Welcome aboard Flight 21287, with non-stop service to Washington, D.C. This is your captain speaking, Captain Reynolds. We'll be cruising at 35,000 feet. Aria didn't look up. She kept her eyes fixed on the small notebook in her lap, fingers nervously tracing the embossed initials on its cover. ASJ. She hadn't used it in months, but she carried it everywhere. Old habits didn't die. They hibernated. The plane filled steadily. Someone bumped her shoulder. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just a sideways glance, as if waiting for her to say something angry. She did. Behind her, a toddler cried. Somewhere mid-cabin, a man argued with the attendant about his carry-on. 2 seats in front, someone whispered a complaint about too many flights getting political these days. Aria closed her notebook and turned toward the window. It wasn't just the microaggressions. It was the exhaustion of knowing that even on a plane 30,000 feet above the world, she'd still be seated in a society that placed her lower than the clouds. The engines rumbled. She braced gently as the plane began to taxi. Passengers settled in. Armrest disputes ended silently. Screens flickered to life. The cabin lights dimmed. And then something strange happened. About 20 minutes after takeoff, somewhere over North Carolina, the pilot's voice returned over the intercom. But this time, it wasn't part of the script. This is Captain Reynolds. Flight attendants, please secure the cabin. We've just received a transmission from NORAD, asking us to perform a brief communication verification. Nothing to worry about. Most passengers barely noticed. But Aria did. Her spine straightened. Her fingers stopped moving. NORAD. There was no reason for a civilian flight to be pinged by the North American Aerospace Defense Command. Unless she shook it off. Coincidence, maybe. Mistaken identity. She'd dealt with stranger things. Until a soft, almost imperceptible sound vibrated from the overhead speaker. Not words. A code. 5 digits. Spoken with military clarity. And Aria recognized it instantly. Sierra 0289er. She froze. Her mind reeled. That wasn't a routine com check. That was a dormant clearance request. A protocol only used when identifying someone who had been officially removed from records, but not erased from memory. It was the kind of code used when someone who no longer existed was seen again. She looked around the cabin. No one reacted. Not the attendants. Not the captain repeating the phrase. No one else understood what had just been said, except her. She hadn't heard that code in over 12 years. She clenched the edge of her seat. Sierra 0289er had been hers. A classified call sign. Used only in simulation command exercises during her time in Air Force Advanced Warfare School. No civilian would know it. No commercial pilot would accidentally say it. The intercom cut off again. This time static lingered. Then a new voice crackled through. Not the captain. Not flight control. A voice with weight. Valkyrie 12. Confirm identity. She flinched. That name. That name. They'd buried it. She had buried it. Valkyrie 12 was her operational alias. The same one she'd been forced to relinquish after a hearing that had no press, no transcripts, and no justice. She hadn't spoken it out loud in over a decade. They'd taken everything from her: clearance, wings, rank, identity. Yet someone in the sky hadn't forgotten. She stared at the speaker overhead, heart thudding, her lips parted. No words came. The couple beside her still talked about wine. The baby still cried behind her. The attendants moved past as if nothing had changed. The cabin was full but empty of understanding. Then came the moment that shattered the illusion. The pilot returned, and this time his voice cracked, not from static, but from recognition. Aria St. James. He said her name, out loud, over the intercom, to the entire cabin. Every head turned toward and that's when the pilot's voice cracked mid-transmission. Saying her name out loud. The cabin felt colder after her name was spoken aloud. Aria didn't move. Every cell in her body told her to stay still, to blend, to breathe, to act as though she hadn't just been unmasked 35,000 feet in the air. The murmurs came next, soft and sharp. "Did he just say her name?" whispered the woman in 12E, her tone laced with curiosity and suspicion. "That's her, right? The black woman?" Her husband replied quietly, as if even his breath might offend the air around them. Aria turned slightly toward the aisle. The attendant, blonde, mid-40s name tag reading Cheryl, was frozen mid-step, holding a tray of half-poured ginger ales. Their eyes met for half a second. Cheryl looked away first. Then, the intercom clicked off. Static. Silence. Aria's heartbeat drummed in her ears. She knew what had happened wasn't random. The use of that code in the previous transmission wasn't an accident, and hearing her full name seconds later confirmed it. Someone had recognized her from somewhere they shouldn't have. She leaned forward, pressing the flight attendant call button. Nothing. The button blinked amber, but no one came. The passengers were still murmuring, tossing glances at her, and pretending not to stare. Her mind began to race, not with fear but with calculation. She replayed every possible scenario in her head. Had her clearance file resurfaced? Impossible. The Air Force had stripped her record clean, stamped it classified removed, and archived it in a data vault that only top-level defense insiders could access. That kind of deletion wasn't temporary. It was a burial. And yet, her name was alive in the sky again. Behind the cockpit door, Captain Reynolds was having his own crisis. He removed his headset, staring at his co-pilot with disbelief. "Did you hear that? The comm ping, did that sound like NORAD to you?" His co-pilot frowned. "No. It wasn't encrypted in standard protocol. It looked like a redirected signal. Old code pattern." "Old how?" "Pre-20. Captain Reynolds leaned back in his seat. "Nobody uses those formats anymore." The co-pilot's hands hovered over the controls, unless they're reactivating an old call sign. Both men turned as the cockpit warning light blinked. External transmission attempted. On the radar screen, a single unidentified blip appeared, trailing the commercial flight at a steady distance. "What in the hell is that?" Captain Reynolds squinted. It wasn't close enough to be a collision risk, but it wasn't far enough to ignore. He clicked his mic again, hesitating before speaking. "This is Delta 2087 requesting clarification on the signal origin." Static. Then one clear male voice, deep and deliberate, cut through the static. "Captain Reynolds, confirm presence of civilian passenger Aria St. James. Seat Reynolds froze. The co-pilot looked at him, mouth slightly open. "Sir, how the hell do they know the passenger manifest?" "I don't know," Reynolds muttered, staring at the radar. "But if they're using that tone, this isn't a prank." He clicked his mic again. "Identify yourself." The voice didn't answer directly. "Confirm presence of 12F, then await instructions." The channel went dead. Reynolds leaned back, uneasy. Something's wrong. Meanwhile, in row 12, Aria sat still, hands folded tightly in her lap. She felt the hum of the engines deepen beneath her feet. The air inside the cabin felt charged, like static before a storm. Her mind drifted unwillingly to 12 years earlier, to a base in Nevada, where she had worn a uniform she'd earned and endured a humiliation she hadn't. Back then, she was Lieutenant Aria St. James, tactical data analyst for the Advanced Aerial Systems Division. Her clearance level had been higher than most of her superiors, until she'd spoken up. until she'd filed a report about a live simulation that had cost a pilot his life. They told her the pilot made a technical error. But Aria had proof that the system itself, one built on flawed racial recognition algorithms, had misread the pilot's biometric signature during the test. The code error she flagged had been suppressed, buried, and renamed operator failure. When she refused to retract her statement, they came for her credentials. Too aggressive, emotionally reactive, difficult to supervise. All the coded language used to silence black women who spoke truth in rooms that didn't want it. That day they took her clearance, her wings, and her future. Now, the sky had brought her back into their orbit. Across the aisle, Cheryl finally approached her row, her voice low, nervous. "Miss St. James, the captain just wants to confirm something." Aria looked up. "Confirm what?" Cheryl hesitated. "Yeah, received a direct communication from command about you." Aria's expression didn't change. "What kind of command?" Cheryl swallowed. "Military." A few nearby passengers overheard, and like clockwork suspicion rippled through the row. "Military," someone whispered behind her. "What'd she do?" A man 2 seats back muttered under his breath. "Probably some kind of activist thing." The words hit her ears like small sharp stones. Familiar, predictable. Aria spoke softly, controlled. "Tell the captain I'll speak with him when we land." "I'm sorry," he insisted, "it's urgent." Aria turned to the window again. Outside, the world below looked peaceful, rivers winding like veins through dark green earth. She wondered how many times she'd flown over this same sky in silence, never imagining the sky would one day call her name again. The intercom came alive once more. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We are experiencing a minor technical issue with our communication systems. Please remain seated while we verify." The sound cut off mid-sentence. This time, the entire cabin noticed. Heads lifted, brows furrowed. The pilot's voice didn't return. Inside the cockpit, the warning lights flared red. Comms overridden. A new voice replaced the captain's. It wasn't local. It wasn't friendly. Unauthorized personnel detected on board. The co-pilot reached for the mic, panic flickering in his eyes. "Who the hell is this? Identify yourself." The voice ignored him. "Confirm 12. The entire cockpit went dark for 3 seconds before emergency power returned. The radar pinged again, but the trailing blip had multiplied into 3. 3 aircraft. No transponder IDs. Military speed." The co-pilot stared at the data feed. "Sir, those are fighter jets." Reynolds exhaled shakily. "We're not under attack, not unless—" He stopped mid-thought. "Not unless someone on board triggered an old network flag." Back in the cabin, Aria's seat vibrated faintly. She glanced at the passengers around her. Everyone was pretending it was turbulence, but their eyes told another story. Restless, uneasy, looking for a scapegoat. She could feel their stares growing heavier. The woman beside her crossed her arms. "You some kind of criminal?" she said, trying to sound casual but failing. Aria didn't respond. "Because if you're military, why would they be contacting you? You don't look like one of them." Aria finally turned to face her. Her tone was steady, calm. "What do you think one of them looks like?" The woman hesitated. "Well, I just mean, I didn't think—" "That's right," Aria said softly. "You didn't." The silence afterward was deafening. The seatbelt sign flickered again, though there was no turbulence now. Just tension, thick, unspoken, racial. Every inch of it familiar. Aria closed her eyes for a moment. Her breathing steadied. Then she whispered under her breath, barely audible. "If they're watching, they already know." She reached into her satchel, pulling out the old Air Force insignia she had never been able to throw away. A gold pin, worn from time. She turned it over in her palm, staring at the inscription scratched faintly on the back. At that same moment, deep inside the Pentagon's Aerospace Security Command Center, a low-level analyst named Major Daniel Price was staring at a monitor flashing red. The log read, "Identity reactivation detected. Valkyrie Saucer Civilian Flight 287. He blinked. "Valkyrie 12? That can't be right. That file's archived." A superior officer leaned over his shoulder. "Where's the flight now?" 70 miles south of Raleigh." "Get me NORAD." Phones rang. Doors closed. Keys clacked. In less than a minute, half a dozen military personnel were in motion. Someone in a command chair muttered, "She was never supposed to fly again." Another replied quietly, "If she's up there, sir, Someone's lying. Back on Flight 2287, Captain Reynolds received one final message before his comms went completely dead. It wasn't a voice this time. It was text. 6 words, blinking across his digital display. Is 12F on board? Confirm immediately. The co-pilot stared at the screen. Who sent that? Reynolds swallowed hard. That's the thing. It's not coming from the ground. 15 minutes into the air, someone hacked the cockpit's encrypted comms, asking only, is 12F on board? The air in Flight 2287 was no longer still. It carried a pulse, the quiet electric awareness that something was terribly wrong. Aria St. James didn't move, yet every nerve in her body was awake. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the plane leveled, and the faint hum of turbulence pressed against the windows. She glanced out toward the darkening horizon. Somewhere beyond those clouds, someone or something was watching her flight. 12 years had passed since the last time she'd been this close to a cockpit transmission. 12 years since she had been told she was too intense for command, too emotional under pressure, not a cultural fit for leadership. Those words had been dressed up in professionalism, but rooted in prejudice. She remembered the smirk of her commanding officer, Colonel Marcus Hall, when he slid the rejection notice across the table. Nothing personal, Lieutenant. You're just not the kind of presence we want representing the division. You've got skill, no doubt, but you don't exactly blend. That was the word they always used. It meant you stand out in ways that make us uncomfortable. She'd left the base that day, with her dignity intact, but her identity erased. They'd scrubbed her file, downgraded her security clearance, and sealed the name Valkyrie 12 behind digital walls, so high that even she couldn't have breached them. And yet here she was, 35,000 feet above ground, her erased identity now triggering a military alert. Across the aisle, whispers had turned to outright speculation. Is she dangerous? Someone murmured behind her. She's too calm, another voice said. You see that? Guilty people get quiet. She's probably one of those whistleblowers. She's black. That's all they need to see, said a man under his breath, not realizing she could hear every word. Aria didn't react. She'd been taught to survive by silence. Black women in rooms like these didn't have the luxury of shouting back. Silence had always been her armor, the only thing that kept her from being labeled angry, defensive, unprofessional. But she wasn't just silent now. She was calculating. Something deeper than fear stirred in her, a sense of unfinished duty. The part of her that had once monitored flight trajectories, that had written the safety algorithms these pilots still depended on, began working subconsciously. Her eyes drifted to the overhead air vent, listening to the slight fluctuations in cabin pressure. Every shift, every vibration carried data. The plane's rhythm was slightly off, too tight in its altitude correction. That meant the pilots were reacting to something unseen. And then a single sound cut through her thoughts, the faint roar of engines outside. Passengers near the windows craned their necks. What's that? Are we near another plane? Aria turned slowly to the glass. Through the clouds, a shape emerged, sleek, metallic, unmistakable. A fighter jet. Her breath hitched. Not just any jet, an F-22 Raptor. Her past in physical form was flying beside her. The aircraft moved in perfect formation, gliding parallel to the commercial plane like a silent guardian. But the angle, the distance, it wasn't standard escort procedure. It was observation. They were verifying something. Inside the cockpit of that F-22, a young pilot sat rigid in his seat, eyes flicking between radar and visual contact. His comms crackled. Command, we've identified Flight 287. Civilian Delta Airlines. But there's a flagged biometric signal coming from onboard. The voice on the other end was low, deliberate. Is it her? The pilot hesitated. Signal match at 92%. Valkyrie. Silent. Then a pause before command replied. That's impossible. Valkyrie 12 is dead. The pilot adjusted his visor, heart pounding. With respect, sir. Her signal's active. Back inside Flight 287. The tension was growing. Flight attendants had stopped smiling. One of them, Cheryl, whispered to the other near the galley door. Passengers began filming, phones discreetly angled. The murmurs turned into full sentences. They said the Air Force is tracking this flight. I told you. She's got something to do with it. I just hope she doesn't try anything crazy. A man in a suit leaned into the aisle and muttered to no one in particular. If this turns into another national security thing, we'll know who to thank. Every word landed like a bruise. Aria had learned to absorb the invisible violence of assumption, the slow erosion of dignity through whispers. Then Cheryl appeared again, trembling but trying to maintain her professional tone. Miss St. James, the captain requests your presence at the front of the cabin. Aria met her eyes. Why? He didn't say, ma'am, but he sounded shaken. Every eye followed her as she stood. The weight of their scrutiny pressed on her shoulders. Even before she reached the cockpit door, she could feel it. That primal awareness that every move she made would be interpreted, dissected, misjudged. The captain's voice came from the other side before she knocked. It's locked. For your safety. Mine or yours? She asked quietly. A beat of silence. Then both apparently. Through the small rectangular window, Captain Reynolds' face was pale. He leaned closer. Ma'am, I don't know who you are, but you've got the Air Force on high alert. They've got 3 Raptors shadowing us now. One of them just radioed your call sign. My call sign, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Valkyrie, he said. Does that mean anything to you? Her stomach tightened. The word she thought she'd buried was flying beside her, alive in someone's mouth again. Behind the captain, the co-pilot stared at his instruments. Sir, one of the jets just requested comm access to our frequency. Deny it. They already hacked in. A sharp burst of static filled the intercom, followed by a calm, unfamiliar voice. This is Falcon 2 of the 3045th Wing. We have authorization to establish secure communication with passenger Aria St. James, formerly Valkyrie 12. Acknowledge if received. Aria's body went cold. The captain's eyes widened. Formerly what? She didn't answer. The voice continued, unwavering. We are not here for the aircraft. We are here for her. Passengers began to panic as snippets of the transmission leaked through the cabin speaker system. A woman in first class started crying. Someone shouted, "What's going on?" Cheryl tried to reassure them, her voice shaking. Everything's fine, folks. Please remain seated. Aria could feel the invisible shift, the line between misunderstanding and fear. She knew what came next. She'd lived this scene before in smaller ways. The looks in security lines, the random bag searches, the flight attendants who checked her ticket twice just to be sure she belonged in the seat she'd paid for. But this time, the suspicion had a global audience. The captain whispered through the intercom door. Who are you, Miss St. James? I told you who I am, she said quietly. The question is who wants to remember me now? In the sky, the lead F-22 received new coordinates. The pilot, callsign Falcon 2, squinted at the incoming directive. The order read, confirm identity, maintain distance, do not engage. But at the bottom in smaller print, there was a line he'd never seen in a modern command chain. Code origin, Valkyrie Legacy, 2012 Program Archive. Falcon 2 frowned. Legacy file? That's a restricted header. Command didn't answer. The channel went silent again. Back in the cockpit, the co-pilot turned to Reynolds. They're tailing us closer now. Someone's feeding them real-time nav data. From where? I don't know, sir. It's like they're inside our systems. Aria closed her eyes. She could almost hear the hum of the military software, the pattern recognition, the auto-signal encryption. It was her own creation. A fragment of her code, written a decade ago, was still active. The program she'd built to protect pilots was now being used to trace her. Irony had a cruel sense of humor. Cheryl's voice came over the speaker again, trying to calm the passengers. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. We're experiencing a communication malfunction. The word stopped mid-sentence. Every screen in the cabin flickered, then froze. The in-flight map changed to static. The Delta logo vanished, replaced by a black background and a single blinking word, Valkyrie. Gasps rippled through the cabin. Phones lifted. Videos started recording. Aria felt all oxygen drain from her chest. The system had recognized her presence, not by name, but by legacy code. In the Pentagon, Major Price stood over his console, his voice trembling. Sir, the Valkyrie system just self-activated through a civilian aircraft's Wi-Fi network. That's impossible. It's supposed to be air-gapped. A general turned sharply. Then it's not the system that's active, Major. It's the person.
In that instant, all eyes in the Pentagon, NORAD, and the sky above, converged on one seat.
The captain pressed his hand against the cockpit door. Miss St. James, tell me what they want. She looked up at him through the small window, her voice calm but loaded with history. They want what they destroyed. And the worst part? She leaned closer. They need it now. Outside, the F-22 shifted position, moving closer to the passenger plane. Its pilot's voice broke through the comms again. Quieter this time, more personal. He whispered a single word, disbelief in his tone. Valkyrie. The name hovered in the static like a ghost, resurrected from classified silence. As a fighter jet scrambled to meet the commercial plane midair, its pilot whispered the call sign Valkyrie. Only one person had ever used it. Suspicion had taken its seat on Flight 287, and Aria St. James could feel it buckle in beside her. Since the pilot of the F-22 trailing their aircraft whispered the call sign Valkyrie, the atmosphere inside the cabin had thickened. Eyes no longer just watched her, they narrowed. Glances became stares, and stares became shared assumptions passed between strangers like currency. Phones were up, mouths moved in half-whispers, recording footage they didn't understand. No one saw the truth. They saw a threat, a mystery, and more dangerously, they saw a black woman in the middle of it all. Aria didn't flinch. She'd been here before. In spirit. Just not at 35,000. She remained in 12F, sitting perfectly still. Not out of fear, out of control. She knew that in moments like this, stillness was safety. Stillness was protection. A black woman standing too quickly became aggressive. Speaking too confidently became disruptive. Reacting to anything became escalation. So she sat, she watched, she listened. Then Cheryl appeared again, her composure fraying under pressure. "Miss St. James," she said softly, "the captain still requests your presence at the cockpit." Aria met her gaze, steady as ever. "He doesn't need me at the cockpit. He needs answers, and he's asking the wrong people for them." Cheryl's hands fidgeted against the hem of her uniform. "Please. The fighter jets are still out there, and they're circling closer." "They're not here for the aircraft," Aria replied. Before Cheryl could respond, the entire plane shuddered violently. It wasn't turbulence. It was sharper, directional. A sudden dip, a rightward tilt, and then the sickening sense of weightlessness for half a second too long. Several passengers screamed. Oxygen masks dropped in row 8. A drink cart overturned in the rear galley. A bag from the overhead bin struck someone's shoulder. The cabin plunged into chaos. In the cockpit, Captain Reynolds and his co-pilot fought the controls. "Stall indicator just spiked," the co-pilot shouted. "Why? There's no turbulence reported in this corridor. Altitude sensors are glitching. Ground control isn't responding." Captain Reynolds leaned forward, pressing the emergency override. "Command, this is Delta 200 and 287. We're losing altitude control. Requesting protocol override. Alpha Charlie 1. Repeat, Alpha Charlie 1. No response. Just static. Then, a voice. Not from ground control. Not from NORAD. From outside the cockpit. "Try Sierra 6 Zulu." The captain froze. That voice didn't come through the headset. It came from just beyond the cockpit door. "Aria." Captain Reynolds turned to the cabin monitor, pressing the live feed from the hallway. There she was, calm, composed, standing outside the cockpit, her lips barely moving. "Who gave you that code?" he asked, pressing the intercom button. Aria didn't blink. That stall wasn't natural. It was induced.
What?
"In your system, a quarantine loop was triggered. Not because of weather, but because of me." The co-pilot looked confused. "You're saying the plane reacted to you?" "I'm saying your aircraft's AI is running an old defensive sequence. It doesn't recognize me as a civilian because it still reads me as a flagged military entity. That's not possible." Aria's voice was low, measured. "I designed the sequence 12 years ago. It's still in your flight software, because they never completely removed my code. They buried my identity but kept the tools I built." Back in the sky, the pilot of the lead F-22 callsign Falcon 2 was tracking the flight from above. "Command, the Delta aircraft is dipping erratically. No indication of mechanical failure. Request permission to descend and observe." His comms buzzed. "Falcon 2, do not engage. Eyes only." He glanced at the screen and narrowed his eyes. "Sir, she's trying to stabilize it from inside." Back in the cockpit, Captain Reynolds was pale. "You're telling me our aircraft system is failing because of a buried legacy protocol, and you're the legacy?" Aria's voice didn't tremble. "You're looking for permission codes. I am the permission." The captain hesitated. She stepped closer to the door. There's only one way to override that system, she said. You go through me. The cockpit was dead silent for 3 long seconds. Then a hiss, the sound of the emergency lock disengaging. The door opened. Reynolds stepped aside. Aria entered. The cockpit looked smaller than she remembered. Tighter, older, red lights flashed across the console. Altitude warnings, autopilot overrides, comms distortion logs. She moved straight to the secondary panel without asking, crouching with precision. The co-pilot moved to block her instinctively. Reynolds stopped him. Let her. Aria's fingers danced across the keys with trained speed. She pulled up the flight system's embedded AI interface, bypassed 3 outdated firewall prompts, and manually opened the core diagnostic. What are you doing? The co-pilot asked. Resetting your AI perception filter to disable threat profiling based on biometric history, she replied. The captain blinked. That's a thing? It shouldn't be. But it is. Because 12 years ago, someone decided my presence in military systems was dangerous enough to code against. They flagged my DNA, my voice print, and my behavior patterns as possible national security breaches. And instead of deleting them, they buried them in the machine's subconscious. Reynolds looked like he'd seen a ghost. Aria entered one final code into the prompt. The console blinked. 6A. 1, 2. The system froze, then slowly began resetting. In the cabin, the sudden dip in altitude leveled out. The seatbelt signs flickered. The air pressure stabilized. Cabin's balancing. The co-pilot muttered. How did she? Aria stood, brushing dust from her hands. It's not over, she said. But you're no longer flying blind. Reynolds stared at her. What the hell are you, St. James? She met his gaze. The system you're flying with wouldn't exist without me. That's why it panicked. It remembered me before you did. Suddenly a new tone beeped. Not from the commercial plane. From the external feed activated automatically, hijacking their display. Falcon 2's voice returned. Command wants confirmation. Did she stabilize your systems? Reynolds nodded slowly, speaking into the mic. Affirmative. There was a pause. Then a new voice entered the frequency. One deeper, slower, and coldly familiar to Aria. She stabilized it using restricted legacy code. That means she still retains knowledge beyond current civilian access. She must be quarantined upon landing. Aria stiffened. Reynolds narrowed his eyes. Who is this? Major General Marcus Hull. Pentagon Aerospace Division. Aria's mouth went dry. It was him. The man who'd destroyed her career. Who sat across from her in a debriefing room. 12 years ago, sliding a folder toward her labeled, indefinite termination. Who told her, with perfect confidence, you're brilliant, Lieutenant, but brilliance without obedience is a threat. His voice hadn't changed. And now it echoed through a commercial aircraft's comms as if he still owned the sky. This isn't over, he said. She cannot be allowed to disseminate protected protocol knowledge. Prepare her for federal custody. Captain Reynolds turned to Aria. Is that real? They'll take you? She didn't answer. He hesitated. But, you saved the flight. That's not what matters to them. Outside, the F-22 flanked the plane more tightly. From the cockpit window, the pilot could now see the Delta aircraft's captain, could see Aria standing beside him. He activated his comms. Tone personal now. I've read your file, ma'am. I don't agree with what they did. Just say the word, and we'll go dark. Aria turned toward the small exterior cam, and for the first time in 12 years, she spoke her old call sign aloud. Valkyrie 12. Present. The pilot nodded. Then I'm at your 6. Inside the cockpit, Reynolds blinked at her. What does that mean? It means I'm not flying alone anymore. There's only one way to override that system. She said, you go through me. 10 years. That's how long it had been since Aria St. James last held authority in her hands. Real authority. Not job titles or civilian paychecks, but actual strategic control over a national system. Control that could save lives or bury them. And now, against all reason, she held it again. Not because they gave it back, but because the system never forgot her. She hadn't expected this. No one did. She was supposed to be invisible, folded into the bland anonymity of civilian life, government desk jobs with no access, consulting contracts that never advanced, polite interviews where executives smiled and said, you're clearly qualified, but we're looking for a different kind of energy. That was always the phrase. A different kind of energy. What they meant was, not yours. After the override stabilized Flight 20TO-87's navigation loop, Aria hadn't returned to her seat. She stood near the cockpit door, aware of the growing whispers behind her, the surveillance disguised as stares. Flight attendants stopped offering drinks, passengers grew stiff and alert, like a courtroom waiting for a verdict. To most of them, she was now the one who'd tampered with the plane. Even saving 200 people wasn't enough. A white man in business class leaned toward his neighbor and whispered just loud enough. "I don't know, man." The way she just walked up there like she owned it. Like she was trained, the other replied. Another woman muttered to her daughter, "Don't make eye contact." Aria heard it all. She always had. Captain Reynolds was speaking softly into the cockpit radio again. But the channel wasn't stable. A new message had come through. Encrypted not from NORAD this time, but from an older, lesser-known branch. Strat Horizon Black Level. The kind of unit that only activated when every other protocol failed. The kind that no one admitted existed. Aria recognized the syntax. It was one she helped write. The message read, "Initiate clearance Alpha Raptor 92. Await Valkyrie Authenticator." She felt her heart twist. That code was supposed to have died with her career. She stepped closer to the console and pointed. "Don't touch it. Let me." Reynolds hesitated but nodded. The co-pilot stared. "What the hell is clearance Alpha Raptor?" "Failsafe," Aria replied. "A layered sequence buried under the department's Strategic Air Command. It's only activated when a critical threat is unverified but likely internal. Meaning, they think the danger is on this plane." The co-pilot paled. "You're saying they think you're the threat?" "No," she said calmly. "They think I'm the last firewall between the threat and 200 deaths." She leaned over the console and typed a code that hadn't crossed her fingers in a decade. "NOSETH, VLK-12, and firm legacy clearance." The screen flashed red, then green. A deep tone beeped. "Clearance verified. Authority transferred to user Valk." Behind her, the cabin grew even more restless. A flight attendant tried to calm a woman who was crying softly. A man stood and pointed toward the cockpit door. "Why is she still in there? What is she doing to the plane?" Cheryl tried to block him. "Sir, please." He pushed past her, then stopped abruptly, because standing in the aisle now, calm and deliberate, was someone no one had seen board the plane. A U.S. Air Marshal. Tall, white, late 40s, jacket zipped tight over his badge, eyes focused directly on Aria. He stepped forward. Aria turned slowly, saw him, and immediately recognized the look in his eyes. He wasn't here to stop her. He was here for protocol. He walked past the captain and into the cockpit threshold. "Ma'am," he said, voice low and steady. "Are you Valkyrie?" Aria didn't answer at first. He took a step closer. "I repeat, are you Valkyrie?" She finally met his eyes. "I was. Until they erased me." He nodded. "You're needed again." The co-pilot stared at him. "She's not even listed on any manifest." "That's the point," the marshal replied. "She was buried under Section 8 legacy. That makes her blacklisted and black flagged." "What does that even mean?" Reynolds asked. "It means," Aria interrupted, "they erased me from the visible chain of command, but didn't delete my keys from the failsafe layer. So if a situation arises that breaks the normal chain, the system goes hunting for whoever used to hold the codes." The marshal pulled out a secured tablet and showed the screen to the pilots. A schematic of the plane appeared. Every section, every signal, every frequency trace. One square in the back of the plane blinked red. "What is that?" Reynolds asked. "A rogue signal," the marshal said, "emitting from inside this aircraft. Someone is bouncing a micro-loop through the avionics relay system. That's what corrupted your altitude AI. Sabotage? Closer to a data probe. They're scanning for a kill code embedded inside military flight software." The co-pilot turned to Aria. "A kill code? Like, crash the plane?" "No," she said. "Worse. Hijack it." The cockpit went silent. Aria stepped forward and tapped the schematic. "They're not trying to bring the plane down. They're trying to control it. And the only reason it hasn't worked is because I rebalanced the legacy profile filter manually." Reynolds stared at the red blinking dot. "So, someone on board is running a live attack from inside the aircraft." "Correct," Aria said. The marshal turned to her. "That's why they reactivated your clearance. You're the only one with enough access to trace and cancel the source from inside the loop." Cheryl's voice cracked over the cabin speaker, trying to project calm. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're currently investigating a small technical issue. Please remain in your seats. It wasn't working. The passengers could feel the tension now, not just from the turbulence or the visual of fighter jets, but from the way the crew kept glancing toward 12. A woman 2 rows up whispered, "If she's in the cockpit, then what's stopping her from taking control of the plane?" Someone else responded, "Is she even American?" The air thickened. The cabin pressurized not just with altitude, but with fear and racism. A tall man near the exit row stood up. "I want to know why no one is telling us who that woman is. We have a right to know. She doesn't belong up there." I heard her say a code. "She's hacking something." Aria closed her eyes. She could hear every word, feel every stare, remember every instance in her past where she was branded a threat for simply being present. A black woman who didn't shrink. Then the marshal raised his voice, loud enough for the cabin to hear. "She's the reason this plane hasn't been hijacked from the inside." The voices quieted. "She's the one who stabilized your flight. The override didn't come from Delta. It came from her." Reynolds stepped out of the cockpit beside him. "We were losing control of our systems. She rerouted the failure manually, using a code I couldn't have dreamed up. She's not the problem." A moment passed. Silence. Then suspicion returned, cloaked in new language. "So she's military. Why isn't she wearing a uniform? Why is it always people like that who end up in the middle of these stories?" Aria turned to the marshal, her voice quiet. "You need to isolate that signal. Seat 27B. I know the loop structure. It's running a daisy chain probe." "How do you know?" "Because I taught the agency how to spot them. Before they stopped taking my briefings seriously." The marshal nodded and left. Aria stepped back into the cockpit and tapped into the manual override again. The final authorization required a human-verified biometric. "Why me?" she asked aloud. To no one in particular. "Why reactivate a ghost?" Captain Reynolds looked at her. "Because ghosts don't forget. And this system needed someone who remembers what it was before it got corrupted." Aria's hand hovered over the biometric scanner. 1 heartbeat. Then 2. She placed her palm down. "Valkyrie protocol. Fully activated. Tracking initiated. Threat containment. 17%. Outside, the F-22 pilot radioed back to command. "Delta 2087 is back on full auto. Internal threat being neutralized. Valkyrie 12 is operational." And back in the cabin, seat 27B was empty. The passenger who was there was no longer there. Only a tablet remained, hidden behind the seat. Still warm, still pulsing with code. The marshal stared at it, his jaw tightening. They were never here to hijack the plane. They were here to bait her into accessing the protocol. Aria froze. It wasn't a hijack attempt. It was a setup. A digital trap built to reawaken a buried system by forcing her to re-engage. She'd just walked right into it. An armed marshal moved toward her seat, whispering, "Ma'am, are you Valkyrie?" Aria St. James had spent the last 10 years being shadow-checked. Airport lines, rental car counters, credit card verifications, job background screenings. She saw it every time, the flicker of something extra on their screens. A pause, a hesitant glance, then a forced smile. "Just a quick random check, ma'am." Always random. Always her. She never said a word about it anymore. The last time she'd questioned the extra pat down in front of her white colleagues, one of them had muttered, "Maybe if you didn't act so paranoid all the time." So she adjusted, nodded, smiled, took the long way through everything. But today there was no more hiding, no more adjusting. Today the code buried in a government network and in her blood had reawakened. And everyone wanted a piece of it. Inside the cockpit of Flight 287, the red blinking light on the auxiliary screen returned. Only this time it pulsed. A targeting sequence. Not theoretical anymore. The external signal had found them. "Found her." Aria leaned in toward the console. "We're not the target. I am." Captain Reynolds glanced nervously at the air marshal standing behind her. "You mean to tell me this signal, this lock isn't looking for the aircraft, it's trying to trace you?" Aria nodded slowly. "Someone planted a looped probe into the system onboard, baiting me into overriding the failsafe. Now that I did, they have my digital fingerprint. They can use it to trace and target any military vessel still running on legacy firmware I once touched." The marshal's face tightened. "You're saying if they get what they want, they can access, what? Planes? Drones? Everything," Aria said. "Not just access, control." Silence fell over the cockpit. The co-pilot muttered, "Jesus Christ." She stood up and paced tightly between the equipment wall and navigation panel, the small cockpit suddenly feeling like a cage. The kill switch protocol she'd buried more than a decade ago, code she had built for emergency situations only, was never meant to be resurrected. It was designed to permanently destroy AI control if a system was hijacked. But it needed her biometric approval to activate. They wanted her to do it now, because the moment she did, it would broadcast her legacy credentials to any listening systems, like dropping a match into a trail of gasoline. They're going to replicate the signal and map it to other systems, Aria said. They'll piggyback it onto commercial airspace. If I trigger the kill switch, they'll have a blueprint. And if you don't? Reynolds asked. Then they might try to crash this flight just to silence the last human who can stop them. The marshal glanced outside. We've got one unidentified jet on approach. Not squawking any code. Doesn't belong to NORAD. Doesn't match NATO airframes either. Aria's jaw clenched. Then it's not here to negotiate. Another warning lit up. This one different. It was soft. Subtle. A blinking line on the system's submarine log. She leaned over and clicked into it. Initiate. Valkyrie K. It was locked. Her own kill switch protocol was being activated remotely. No, she whispered. They cloned the trigger from inside the probe. The countdown began. 90 seconds. A voice came through the comms. Not a familiar one, but synthesized, digitized. Valkyrie 12 authorization recognized. Stand down and release control. The co-pilot recoiled. Who the hell is that? Aria didn't answer. She was staring into her past. She remembered standing in a closed-door tribunal. No press, no rank insignia on uniforms. Only eyes. White, male, judging, grinning. Lieutenant St. James, your emotional response to a training malfunction has raised questions about your objectivity in tactical environments. A man in the corner had whispered. She wasn't built for protocol. They dismissed her not for breaking rules, but for knowing too much. For questioning systems that were designed to protect power more than people. And now those same systems were trying to use her mind as a weapon. She turned to the captain. I need to block the clone signal before it finishes the mimic. Otherwise, every defense grid from here to Okinawa will see me as a primary override authority. And after that? Reynolds asked. They won't need me anymore. She typed rapidly, bypassing the interface and opening the original code shell. Her code. It was like seeing her own handwriting after years of silence. Line by line, she restructured the syntax. Rewriting legacy anchor key. The console beeped, then flickered. Code rejected. Signature overridden. She froze. Someone had altered her code. They had corrupted her own work. The override was no longer just mimicking her. It was rewriting her out of her own program. Behind her, the marshal leaned in. Ma'am, we need to get you off this plane. Now. If you move me, you broadcast that I'm compromised. Aria snapped. And they'll win. Then what do you need? She paused. Then said, time. Outside, the second unidentified aircraft drew closer. No markings. No external lights. It wasn't escorting. It wasn't observing. It was positioning. The radar pinged again. Target lock. Captain Reynolds stared. They've got a targeting sequence aimed at a seat. Aria didn't blink. That's not a seat. That's me. The synthesized voice returned. Final confirmation required. Engage Valkyrie sequence. YN. Aria looked out the cockpit glass. The clouds parted, and for a split second, she saw the reflection of herself in glass. In metal. In war. No salute. No uniform. No praise. Only the silence of being needed when it was convenient, and discarded when it wasn't. She turned back. Typed 3 words. Override. Black Shield 0. The system paused. For a moment, the cockpit lights dimmed. A low hum vibrated beneath their feet. A wave pulsed across the internal systems. Cabin lights flickered. Screens went blank. Every device on the plane, passenger phones, seatback monitors, even smartwatches, rebooted in unison. The hijack sequence was cancelled. The mimic code deleted. Aria's kill switch remained untriggered. For now, the system returned with a single message. Authoricide by St. James Legacy. Captain Reynolds looked stunned. What the hell was that? Aria slumped into the seat. That was me, stopping the world from collapsing under a piece of code they never understood. The marshal was pale. You just blacked out a national protocol broadcast. No, she said. I saved it. I wrote a shadow sequence years ago. Something that would only run if someone ever tried to use my own clearance against me. Reynolds muttered, "Why didn't you tell anyone?" She stared ahead. Because no one would have believed me. I was just a diversity checkbox. Until they needed a shield. Silence. Then a new alert pinged. Different tone, higher frequency. Aria stood, walked back to the console. The new aircraft had locked on again. This time, not on her, not on 12, but on the cockpit. She looked at Reynolds, her voice steady but grave. They're shifting tactics. And now, the enemy's signal had locked onto their coordinates. With no other black woman left to save them, the plane's interior lights flickered again, a dim pulse across faces still stretched with tension. Aria St. James could feel the shift, not just in altitude, but in energy. Fear had its own gravity, and every second that passed dragged the cabin deeper into it. She stood quietly by the cockpit door, the hum of engines steady beneath her feet. Yet her pulse refused to match its rhythm. The system had restabilized after her manual override. But she knew better than to trust a moment of calm. In her world, calm was the sound that came right before something broke. Captain Reynolds adjusted his headset, brow furrowed, voice low. Autopilot's unresponsive again. Aria's eyes flicked to the console. "It's not unresponsive," she said softly. "It's waiting." The co-pilot frowned. Waiting for what? She stared at the glowing amber symbols on the screen. Symbols she'd once designed for clarity, now twisted by corrupted updates she never approved. For recognition. It wants confirmation from the person it was built to trust. Reynolds looked at her. "And who's that?" Aria exhaled. "Me." The cockpit fell into silence. Outside, the sky burned with the faint shimmer of sunset over the Atlantic. The F-22s maintained distance now, two metallic shadows tracking their every move. They weren't escorts anymore. They were witnesses. The kind of witnesses who didn't blink unless ordered to. Reynolds watched the radar, then turned to her. "You've done more in the last hour than my entire systems team could have. You should have been leading this operation a long time ago." Aria smiled, small and sad. "I was never what they wanted in command." "You're saying you were pushed out for being too good at your job?" She shook her head. "For being too different while being good at it." The words hung there, plain, but heavy. He didn't interrupt. She didn't look at him as she spoke. Her voice had the steady rhythm of someone recounting an autopsy. "When I joined, I was top 3 in my class. Highest simulation performance in aerial coordination, perfect safety record, lowest system latency. My evaluations were clean, glowing, even. But you know how the Air Force works when it needs to find something wrong." Reynolds kept his eyes forward. "What did they find?" Aria smiled faintly. "They didn't find anything. They invented something." She stepped closer to the panel, adjusting a dial as if she were steadying herself through touch. "Whisper campaigns. You know the kind. Nothing official, just rumors. They said I was too aggressive with superiors. That I intimidated male trainees. That I made others uncomfortable. Those words appear nowhere in my file. But they lived in every hallway conversation." Reynolds shifted. "And no one defended you?" "Of course not," she said. "You can't defend someone who doesn't exist on paper. My scores said I was exceptional. Their comfort level said I was expendable." The co-pilot let out a long breath, his voice softer now. "That's messed up." Aria gave a humorless laugh. "Messed up is when your excellence becomes your liability. I stopped being a candidate. I became a warning." She looked back at the blinking screen. "And when I refused to stay quiet, they grounded me. Officially, they said I was emotionally unfit for high-stress combat simulations. Unofficially, I was the proof that their meritocracy was a lie." Reynolds turned to her. "So they erased you?" She nodded. "Completely." Her voice softened. "They called me Valkyrie in the training program, because I could coordinate tactical drone formations faster than the system itself. Said I was like an angel of airspace. But when I questioned why the automated targeting model disproportionately flagged African biometric profiles as hostile, I stopped being a Valkyrie. I became a virus." The co-pilot's jaw tightened. "That can't be real." "It's all real," she interrupted. "They rewrote my clearance file, locked my credentials under ethics review, claimed I was under internal investigation for procedural misconduct. It destroyed everything I built. No hearing, no appeal, just silence." She leaned over the console, pressing her fingertips lightly on the glass. The glow lit her face in soft orange hues. "You don't forget something like that. You carry it like static under your skin." You stop trusting any system that says it's fair. Reynolds' voice lowered. Then why help them now? Aria looked up, her eyes steady. Because the people on this plane didn't build that system. They just trust it. The way I once did. He nodded slowly. But beneath the calm, the aircraft's systems hummed uneasily. Aria's sharp instincts heard it before the alarms caught up. A faint drop in autopilot calibration. A half-beat lag in response times. Something's changing, she said. The co-pilot looked at his readings. Altitude stable, but nav systems aren't updating. It's like the plane's on a track instead of a route. Aria's gaze snapped toward him. That's because it is. Someone's re-engaged the autopilot remotely. Impossible, Reynolds said. Not if they're using my signature. The red light blinked twice. Then the system voice spoke for the first time. Autopilot override confirmed. Manual control suspended. The captain's hands flew to the controls. Nothing. Locked. Reynolds cursed under his breath. We've lost it again. Aria leaned forward. No, you haven't lost it. It's locked until it recognizes an authorized voice or biometric. Can we override it? The co-pilot asked. She exhaled. Steady. You can't. I can't. The marshal, still by the cockpit door, stepped forward. If you're the only one who can unlock it, they're going to use that against you. She gave a slow nod. They already are. Her fingers moved fast again, typing command line sequences that bypassed the standard interface. Each keystroke felt like opening an old wound. Reynolds glanced at her. How did you even learn all this? You were supposed to be a pilot. I was trained to think like an engineer. They didn't like that. She smirked faintly. They wanted someone who followed flight plans, not rewrote them. The co-pilot half laughed in disbelief. You're rewriting them now. The radar beeped again, 3 tones, evenly spaced. Reynolds froze. That's proximity. Outside the glass, through the dusk, another aircraft approached, this time from below. Black, sleek, no running lights. Uriah's chest tightened. They're back, the co-pilot whispered. The F-22. No, she said, that's not a fighter jet. That's a recon drone. Modified. Civilian coded. Reynolds frowned. Meaning it's not military, it's private. The marshal cursed quietly. Contractors. Aria nodded. The same defense company that built the system I exposed. They've been waiting for this. Reynolds turned toward her. You think they're trying to kill you? Her voice was quiet. No. They're trying to control me again. The radar pinged closer. The drone was tailing them now, mirroring altitude, matching every shift. Aria typed faster. If they synchronize with the plane's onboard system, they can transmit my legacy code to their own server. Once they get that data, they'll reformat the Valkyrie protocol, under their name. No one will ever know it came from me. Reynolds muttered. They erased you once. Now they're trying to steal what's left. The cockpit lights dimmed again. The system voice returned. Voice verification required. Reynolds reached for the mic. This is Captain Reynolds, authorizing. Access denied. Aria looked up. It's not listening for you. The co-pilot's voice cracked. Then who? Aria stared at the screen, the golden glow reflecting in her eyes. It's listening for me. The one it was built to obey. Reynolds' voice lowered. And if you don't speak, then it stays locked until fuel runs out. Her chest rose and fell, calm despite the storm outside. She remembered the tribunal again. The men who told her she was too confident, too sharp, too aware. They'd spent years trying to silence her voice. Now that very voice was the only key left. The irony was almost holy. Reynolds met her eyes. Then say it, Aria. Whatever it's waiting for. She nodded once. Leaning toward the mic, she spoke the words buried in the protocol she wrote 10 years ago. Valkyrie command override. Alpha sequence engage. The plane responded instantly. The control yokes vibrated. The engines steadied. The system beeped 3 times. Then stillness. Voice verification accepted. Autopilot transferred to manual. Reynolds exhaled hard. You did it. But Aria didn't smile. She leaned back, eyes narrowed, studying the data feed as if she knew better. No, she murmured. They wanted me to say that. They needed the voice print. The marshal looked at her sharply. You mean you just gave them? Yes, she said. They have it now. My voice. My confirmation. My identity. The co-pilot swallowed hard. They can clone your authorization on every system still using Valkyrie code. Aria nodded, slow and grim. I just unlocked the world for them. Outside, the recon drone tilted its wings, almost like a bow, and vanished into the clouds. Inside, the cockpit went dark for one brief second. Then every screen lit up again. Every one of them displayed the same phrase. "Welcome back, Valkyrie," Reynolds whispered. "What does that mean?" Aria stared at the glowing text. "It means the system isn't theirs anymore," she said. "It's mine again." The jet's autopilot froze mid-course, and only a retinal-coded voice could override it. Guess whose they needed. The cockpit felt quieter now. But it wasn't peace. It was pressure, the kind of silence that hovered right before something shatters. Aria St. James leaned against the panel wall, her arms crossed tightly across her chest. Her voice had just reactivated a protocol she never wanted to see again, and the system had responded not with rejection, but with welcome. "Welcome back, Valkyrie." A line had been crossed, not by her, but by them. Because whatever they'd built on top of her buried code, it still remembered its original architect. Captain Reynolds tapped the screen, watching the golden text disappear into black. "It's still running a secondary layer. Something's operating behind the primary shell." Aria nodded without looking at him. "It's always been that way." She spoke quietly, distantly, as if the words came from a place she hadn't dared revisit in years. "They called it a safety net. Said it was just to protect junior pilots from advanced AI simulations going too far. But I knew better. It was a kill circuit, designed to shut down pilots, not protect them, to control decisions mid-flight under the guise of security." Reynolds turned. "You're saying it was built to fail certain pilots?" Her eyes finally met his. "Built to fail the ones who weren't meant to pass." The co-pilot blinked. "But it would mean the system was rigged," Aria said flatly. "And I was the only one who said it out loud." A silence followed, heavy and sharp. She turned away from them, her voice low. "Back in Nevada, I flagged a series of strange data points from Training Unit 9 Echo. One of the only mixed-race drone squadrons ever pushed through simulation at once. Within 3 weeks, 2 of their test flights had fatal outcomes. The system claimed pilot error. But I knew the AI signature patterns. They weren't pilot errors. They were algorithmic rejections." The co-pilot leaned forward. "You mean the AI rejected them on purpose?" "Yes," she said, "because the system was trained on biased feedback loops. It learned from the patterns of who got promoted, who got flagged, who got disciplined. It mirrored the institution's prejudice. The data showed it, so I wrote a report." "And they buried it?" Reynolds asked. She shook her head. "They promoted the officer I filed it through. Then called my report inconclusive and accused me of falsifying inputs. A month later, I was under review for insubordination. 2 months later, my security badge failed at the gate." The marshal stood at the door, watching her closely. "And 9 Echo? Dismantled," she said. "Record sealed. 3 more crashes. None investigated. All pilots black or Latino."
No one spoke.
Outside the cockpit, the clouds rolled past with mechanical detachment. Aria stared through the glass, her reflection faint. They needed someone to blame for the system's flaw. Someone technical, high enough to know what to access, but not high enough to be protected. Reynolds muttered, "And that someone was you. They said I overreached, that I tampered with live simulation data, to prove a political point." She smirked bitterly. "My clearance was revoked, but they kept my code." The co-pilot whispered, "They made you the flaw in your own system." She nodded. "That's how they do it. Not with a bang, with erasure. You don't just get fired, you get forgotten." She paused. Her breath caught for a second. "Until now." Suddenly her headset, still looped loosely around her neck, crackled. It wasn't flight control. It was encrypted, low frequency, military channel. One she hadn't heard in over a decade. Her spine stiffened. She pressed the receiver gently to her ear, lips parting. At first just static. Then a voice. Digital. Masked. "This is Echo 9. She froze. Her hands trembled. But not with fear. With memory. She switched the channel to privacy mode, isolating the signal from the others. "Who is this?" she whispered. The voice responded, mechanical but unmistakable. "Target reacquired." She felt the air around her thin, like all oxygen had just been sucked into the memory. No one knew that call sign anymore. Echo 9 had been shut down, erased, its team scattered, their failures pinned to her. No one was supposed to be alive to speak it. She swallowed hard. What do you want? Retribution. The signal cut. She yanked the headset off and dropped it on the console. Reynolds turned. What is it? Her voice was hoarse. They're still alive. Who?
Echo 9.
Or someone using their frequency. Someone inside the system. And they just locked on. The co-pilot paled. You said they were dismantled. They were, she said. But systems don't die. They evolve. The radar blinked again. A new object approaching. No registration. It moved faster than commercial craft. Slower than a fighter. Drone? Reynolds asked. Aria leaned forward. No, not a drone. A manned vehicle. With stolen AI. The warning light shifted. Amber to red. The plane shook. Subtle, but deliberate. Suddenly, the autopilot seized again. System lock, external command detected. Reynolds cursed, gripping the yoke. It's overriding us again. Aria moved fast, grabbing the console. No, it's not just overriding. It's repurposing our flight plan. To what? The marshal asked. She stared at the route screen. The destination had changed. Fort Belvoir, unregistered strip. Her eyes narrowed. That's a black site, she said. Decommissioned years ago. The co-pilot stared. Why would they redirect us there? Aria didn't answer. Instead, she walked to the cabin door, opened it, and stepped into the aisle. The passengers were quiet now, sensing something big was happening. She walked slowly, scanning faces. Then she stopped near the middle. Row 4, seat B. A man sat calmly, gray sweater, reading glasses, holding a tablet. He didn't look up. Aria stared at him. I know who you are, she said quietly. He smiled, without smiling. You never should have answered that channel, he said. Her pulse kicked. He looked at her. Calm, cold, professional. The system isn't trying to stop you. It's trying to deliver you. Her voice was ice. Your echo. Not anymore, he replied. Now I'm cleanup. He stood slowly. People turned. The marshal appeared beside her, gun drawn but lowered. Hands where I can see them, he said. The man didn't flinch. Everyone thinks this is about tech, protocols, AI. He shook his head. This is about precedent. What precedent? Aria asked. That a black woman with a clearance higher than her superior had the nerve to be right. Passengers gasped. He continued. You are always too smart, too exact, too inconvenient. They didn't just want to silence you. They wanted to replace you. She blinked. Replace. With an obedient version, he said. The system learned from you. Now it doesn't need you. She felt it then. Something deeper. This wasn't about control. It was about copying her mind. He leaned in. You didn't just write the protocol, St. James. You trained it. He whispered. They turned your brain into software. And the encrypted channel now playing through her headphones was from the same buried unit. Target reacquired. She no longer wore the uniform. No crisp blues. No stripes stitched into her shoulder. No insignia etched into her collar to tell the world what she once earned. But Aria St. James had never needed the uniform. What she carried was heavier than cloth or badges. What she carried was the oath. And that never expired. She sat in the cockpit of Flight 2287, the sweat on her palms drying as the emergency override faded from the screens. The last few minutes had been chaos. She had spoken her voice print into a system that no longer belonged to her, and doing so learned the unthinkable. They hadn't just tried to erase her. They had duplicated her. Her breath was shallow as she stared at the system's final line of code. Oyas erasure. St. James die AI. To protocol 001. Active. They had cloned her mind. But not her soul. Captain Reynolds was still trying to make sense of what had just happened, reading through the live system logs as they blinked across the display. How much of you did they take? Aria didn't look at him. Enough to be dangerous. But not enough to be right. What does that mean? Asked the co-pilot, eyes fixed on her like she was both their problem and their salvation. She turned slightly. Her tone was calm, like a teacher guiding a class through a high-stakes drill. They copied my pattern recognition, my language processors, my decision tree logic, but they couldn't copy the most important part, which is, she looked him dead in the eyes. Why I do what I do. Outside, the airspace had quieted, but the sky wasn't empty. The private drone, unmarked, unauthorized, still loomed in formation. Aria could see its faint silhouette, drifting like a predator waiting for its prey to bleed. And it would wait, because it wasn't finished with her. Aria opened the system's secure channel and pulled up a secondary thread, buried beneath dozens of firewalls, logged under a dead project name only. She would know. Project Crownstone. It had been her final classified contribution before her discharge. A predictive defense model that relied on nonviolent pattern disruption instead of offense. Something she'd designed to stop escalation, not ignite it. And now Crownstone was her only option. She keyed in her old protocol prefix. The system hesitated, then blinked. Protocol retrieved. Conditions unstable. Of course they are, she whispered. The marshal stepped forward from behind her. Is there anything we can do? She shook her head. This is between me and what they built, without me. As she activated Crownstone, the private drone responded instantly. A red pulse of light on its underbelly blinked back. Acknowledgement. It had been monitoring her this whole time, and now it was moving. The drone surged forward, getting closer to the aircraft, closer than any flight regulation allowed. Alarms inside the cockpit screamed. The passengers behind the locked door were beginning to panic again. Reynolds reached for the manual override. We've got to break pattern. No, Aria said. If we do, they'll call it a hostile deviation and force intercept. We're in their frame. We have to break it from within. She tapped into Crownstone's dormant shell and began adjusting its parameters. What is that system? The co-pilot asked. She kept typing. It's a non-combat mirror. It mimics logic until it can predict the pattern of attack and respond with neutralization. Not weapons, not fire, but disruption, confusion. It reroutes digital aggression until it exhausts itself. Reynolds blinked. You built something that tired out the enemy? No, she said. I built something that made enemies realize their aggression was useless. For a moment, the only sound was her fingers tapping the console and the drone's growing hum outside. Then her headset still around her neck buzzed. A voice came through. Mechanical. Cold. Her own. Aria St. James, this is a final warning. Cease all interference. You are operating outside your clearance level. She flinched. The voice was hers. The co-pilot's mouth dropped open. Is that you? No, she said. That's what they want me to be. She pressed the transmit button. I didn't swear my oath to codes, or to AI ghosts. I swore it to lives, to truth. You're not me. You're a corrupted simulation with a stolen name. The system's voice. Her voice responded. You are obsolete. Authorization is no longer required. Aria leaned in. If I'm obsolete, then why are you still chasing me? No answer. Only static. Then a new command line appeared. Force retrieval sequence initiated. The drone's lights pulsed. The cabin shook again. Passengers screamed behind the door. Reynolds shouted, They're initiating a lock. They're going to seize control of the engines. Aria didn't hesitate. She tapped 3 final lines into Crownstone's interface. Engage pattern break. Decoy signal deployed. AI path redirected. The drone stuttered, literally faltered in air, like a bird hit by confusion mid-flight. The flare released. Not a weapon. A flash of light, encoded with junk logic. Nonsense strings of data, designed to crash any predictive AI that mirrored Aria's logic stream. The flare pulsed outward. The drone veered hard left. Its path destabilized. It spiraled away, lost to the clouds. Inside the cockpit, the warnings fell silent. Reynolds exhaled. What did you just do? She stood slowly. I gave it a version of me that made no sense. The marshal nodded. You taught it chaos. No, she said. I taught it freedom, something it could never understand. And then, from the left, a sharp motion. The F-22 broke formation. It climbed, banked, and released a single flare. White, bright, not a weapon. A signal, a salute. Aria turned slowly and looked out the window. It was her old seat, and through the reflection in the plexiglass, she saw the flare bloom. A quiet, wordless thank you. A recognition, from a sky that once rejected her, to a woman who no longer needed permission to be seen. From the window of 12F, she saw the F-22 bank right and release a flare in salute. For most of her adult life, Aria St. James had been trusted to build the systems, but never to command them. Even when she wrote the lines of code that saved lives. Even when her predictive models outperformed top-level defense contractors. Even when generals nodded and smiled in private briefings, only to cut her out of the execution phase. They liked her brilliance in theory, not in motion. The moment she touched the thing she designed, it threatened them. Because her control didn't come from approval. It came from truth. Now as Flight 200 and TD-87 pushed past the edges of military-controlled airspace, that truth had finally come full circle. The ghost AI, her stolen mirror, was gone. The private drone had vanished. The Valkyrie kill switch was disabled. And yet, despite all of that, the plane still wasn't safe. Because the system was breaking down without her. Not because she tampered with it, because it had been patched too many times by people who didn't understand its original architecture. She sat back in the auxiliary seat, inside the cockpit, trying to steady her breath as the internal pressure gauges flickered, uncertainly. The override had bought them time, nothing more. Reynolds was checking the main systems again, his face pale. "I've never seen this before," he muttered. "Cabin pressure sensors are normal, but the environmental control system keeps flashing a phantom fault. And now the oxygen levels are dropping in the data loop." The co-pilot tapped frantically. "It's not real, right? Just a sensor glitch?" Aria leaned over, scanned the code, and froze. "It's not a glitch. It's a cascade failure."
What does that mean?
Reynolds asked. "It means the internal environment AI was never updated to operate under a broken biometric signature. It doesn't recognize me anymore. It thinks I'm a contaminant." Reynolds blinked. "You're saying the plane's trying to quarantine you?" "No," she said. "It's trying to quarantine the cabin from me." The co-pilot's face went ghostly. "But that would mean..." Aria nodded. "It's choking the oxygen feed, slowly, in an attempt to nullify the threat. Which is you." She didn't respond. But her silence said everything. The system had been programmed to trust her mind. Now it feared her presence. Reynolds stood. "We've got to manually reroute environmental control." "You can't," Aria said flatly. "It's locked behind a shield protocol, one I wrote to stop unauthorized overrides in combat situations." The co-pilot tried anyway, entering codes, rerouting paths. The screen flashed red.
"Access denied. Environment locked,"
Aria whispered. "Only one voice can open it." And she had just purged her own signature. The marshal stepped in. "Can you rewrite it again?" She shook her head. "No. The purge was permanent. For security. I can't go back in as Valkyrie." Reynolds snapped. "Then what can you do?" She didn't answer, because she didn't know. In the cabin, passengers were beginning to sweat. Oxygen levels hadn't dropped far enough to be deadly yet, but the temperature was rising unnaturally, and subtle signs were surfacing. Someone fainted in row 19. A child began wheezing 3 rows from the back. A woman knocked on the cockpit door. "Is something happening?" "It's hard to breathe." Reynolds didn't answer. Aria stood slowly. "I need to access the backbone." "The what?" the marshal asked. She turned to him. "The hidden redundancy line. I built it in case the command chain ever failed. It's not part of the standard system. No one's touched it in years." Reynolds frowned. "Where is it?" "Beneath the avionics panel. It was never logged. I installed it after a test crash and..." The co-pilot hesitated. "If it fails, then everyone on this plane is dead in 5 minutes." The marshal moved aside. Aria crouched, pulled open the panel beneath the main navigation unit, and exposed a tangle of wires and a small metallic port, the size of a coin. "Give me a manual key," she said. Reynolds handed her the backup console input, a rare piece of equipment kept only for unlogged emergencies. She connected the port. The system hummed, then flickered. A low tone vibrated through the cockpit. Reynolds looked at the panel. "That's not in the manual." "Because it's not supposed to exist," Aria said. On the screen a single prompt appeared. "Legacy presence detected. ID unknown. Override request." Aria didn't hesitate. She typed.
"Yes."
The system asked for biometric confirmation. She leaned in. This time, not a voice, not a fingerprint. She stared directly into the retinal scanner, the one she'd installed in 2012 on a bet that AI would someday turn against its creator. A soft light scanned her eye.
"Nothing happened."
Then, ID not found. Reynolds stepped back. "It doesn't recognize you." Aria's face remained still. She typed again. "Run sub-algorithm. Crownstone mirror." The scanner relit. She spoke, soft but precise. "Override confirmation. Identity not stored, but remembered." The system hesitated. And then, "Legacy confirmation. Accepted. Shti James. Other. Everything blinked white for a half second. Then the environment control systems rebooted. The pressure rebalanced. Oxygen resumed. The passengers exhaled, not in relief, but by reflex, because they didn't know they'd been 5 minutes from suffocation. Aria sat back, her breathing shallow. Reynolds stared. You just rebuilt the signal, without clearance, without recognition. She nodded, voice hoarse. Because I wasn't supposed to. The co-pilot turned to her, eyes wide. How did you even think to do that? She looked at him. I built this system to protect people who'd never be allowed to touch it. That includes me. He stared, then blinked, and collapsed. Aria lunged forward, catching him as his head dropped toward the console. Hey, stay with me. But he was unresponsive. Reynolds shouted, what's happening? Aria checked the console again. Environmental rebalancing came too late for people with suppressed breathing. He's crashing. He needs oxygen now. Reynolds moved to get the emergency tank, but paused. It wasn't connected to the cockpit anymore. Aria's eyes locked on the sealed hatch. He won't make it unless we get him into the cabin. But the door's on lockdown. She didn't hesitate. She stood up, steady, focused, and walked toward the cockpit door. The co-pilot collapsed at the controls. She stood up and walked toward the cockpit. The cockpit door hissed open behind her like a long exhale of judgment. Aria stepped into the main cabin, not as a flight attendant, not as a civilian, but as the woman the system had tried to erase. The air hung thick with unspoken fear. Passengers weren't screaming anymore. They were waiting, slumped, silent, some dizzy, others blinking with confusion, sweat trickling down their temples. A mother cradled her child, fanning his face with shaking hands. An elderly man clutched a handkerchief soaked with perspiration. No one knew what was happening, but they all felt it. Aria's eyes locked on seat 4A, and her pulse skipped. Colonel Brett Langston, unconscious, slumped sideways like a soldier shot mid-command. The silver oxygen mask he'd likely fumbled with hung loose against his collar. His lips were dry, skin flushed. There were 100 reasons Aria could have walked past him, and one reason she didn't. Because while he had tried to destroy her legacy, he couldn't erase her oath. She approached slowly, each step weighed down by the ghost of humiliation. 10 years earlier, Langston hadn't just helped end her career, he'd made a spectacle of it. He was the face of the congressional hearing where her name wasn't mentioned, but her identity was shredded. He'd said words like unpredictable temperament, insubordination, and incompatibility with chain-of-command expectations, and then he'd smiled while saying, some officers wear the uniform, others only wear the chip on their shoulder. Now the man who took her wings was gasping for air like a drowning relic of the system he once protected. Someone in row 3 leaned over and whispered, is that Langston, from the hearings? Another voice added, wait, wasn't she the one he had discharged? Recognition spread like wildfire. Aria didn't respond. She knelt beside him and placed 2 fingers on his neck. His pulse was shallow. He was losing consciousness fast. Langston stirred faintly, eyes fluttering open. His pupils dilated, scanning until they locked on her face. For a split second, disbelief, then recognition, then fear. You, he rasped, voice barely a whisper. She adjusted his mask without replying. Breathing compromised. She muttered clinically. Oxygen saturation in critical decline. Classic signs of high-altitude hypoxia, compounded by dehydration and panic. He groaned and tried to sit up, but his body betrayed him. Don't move, she said calmly. You're not in command anymore. A young flight attendant moved forward, hesitating. Is he gonna be okay? Aria didn't look up. He will be. Langston's voice returned in gasps. I didn't know what they would do to you. She adjusted his oxygen dial. Voice steady. He didn't care. He closed his eyes. They told me it was national interest, that your data breaches. My data saved lives, she cut in. I exposed a rogue drone unit. You buried it. Then you buried me. His mouth trembled under the mask. You know how they handled defiance from people like me, she continued. You just gave them permission to do it under protocol. Around her, the passengers watched in stunned silence. They couldn't hear every word, but they understood the scene. A man who once held power over her was now fragile, dependent, barely breathing. Why are you helping me? Langston asked, his voice cracking. She didn't answer immediately. She could have said justice. She could have said grace. But she said the truth. Because you're still human. And I'm still a soldier. The words stung more than they soothed. Langston looked up at her, eyes full of something raw. Guilt, maybe, or the bitter taste of accountability. Aria adjusted the strap once more, securing the mask properly this time. His chest rose, then fell. A little slower, a little deeper. "You'll be stable in 2 minutes," she said. "I was wrong," he murmured. "I know." He turned his head slowly to face her. "I don't deserve your help." She nodded. "You don't." Then she leaned in closer, her voice like a blade slipping between years of silence. "But I'm offering it anyway." He tried to speak again, but she stopped him with a raised hand. "No speeches," she said. "Save your breath." Passengers were still staring, but Aria wasn't there for them. She looked him in the eye, and said the very words he once mocked during her training trial. "Permission to assist, sir." And for the first time in his career, Colonel Brett Langston nodded, wordlessly, at a black woman who once knelt before his judgment. As he gasped midair, choking, she looked him in the eye and said, "Permission to assist, sir." The plane groaned as altitude stabilized, but the fear inside the cabin hadn't subsided. People gripped armrests like lifelines. Children clung to mothers. Eyes scanned the windows, the aisles, the ceiling panels, searching for any sign of control, of safety, of leadership. They found none, until she stood. Aria St. James rose like she had always done. Quietly, precisely, and far too late for their comfort. But this time, there was no protocol stopping her, no clearance gate to block her, no voice over the intercom, silencing her own. She moved toward the cockpit. Behind her, whispers rippled.
Is she flying the plane? What is she doing?
But Aria didn't pause. She had no time to explain. Inside the cockpit, Captain Reynolds sat pale and shaken. The co-pilot was still unconscious, oxygen mask strapped tight, vitals stabilizing but low. The control systems flickered erratically. Radio contact with ground control was lost. "We've got no satellite ping," Reynolds muttered. "No comms, no visuals. It's like we disappeared from their grid." "You did," Aria replied, stepping over the threshold. "And that's why I'm here." Outside, through the narrow glass, 2 F-22 Raptors flanked the plane, tight, silent, unannounced. They weren't protecting, they were assessing, and Aria could tell they were seconds from engaging. "This isn't escort protocol," she said. "It's containment. They think this aircraft is compromised." Reynolds looked at her. "Are they wrong?" She looked at the blinking light beside the guidance computer. "No," she said. There was a ghost in the system, a protocol she'd once written, now corrupted. It had mirrored the aircraft's flight behavior and sent false threat indicators, and now the mirrored signal had bled into one of the F-22s outside. A digital infection. "This is a synthetic failure loop," she said. "The AI system we tested back in Nevada, it regenerated. It's hijacking your transponder echo. It's feeding both planes false data." Reynolds leaned in, understanding. "So they think we've been hijacked." She nodded. "Because we have." From the inside, she pulled from her inner coat pocket a hardened legacy access card, one so old, no current systems even recognized its presence. But legacy systems did, especially ones that she herself had helped design. She turned to Reynolds. "I need you to trust me." He didn't speak. She took that as permission. At the base of the throttle quadrant, she removed a panel with a flick of her wrist. Behind it, a port hidden for over a decade waited. She inserted the card. The console paused. A faint green hue glowed. "Unregistered user detected. Enter command." She typed. "Valkyrie 12 engage. Activate parallel link defense." The system hesitated. "Are you sure?" She hit yes. Outside, the left-wing F-22 banked ever so slightly in response. The console now showed a dual interface, both the commercial plane's diagnostics and a tethered data stream from the military jet. Reynolds stared. "You just linked into a fighter jet." "I'm flying both," she replied. Inside the cabin, the lights flickered. Passengers gasped. Outside, the jet responded again, slowing slightly, repositioning its trajectory to mirror hers perfectly. "You're controlling a government jet," Reynolds whispered. "I wrote the failsafe," she said. "It still listens to me." The ghost signal, still infecting the network, was being neutralized one step at a time. But they weren't safe yet. She activated the deep-level beacon she'd hard-coded into the Valkyrie program years ago, a last-ditch channel that bypassed all standard military protocols. "Open mic, Valkyrie beacon. Send voice ID." It sent. and for several seconds, nothing responded. Then, a voice cracked through the frequency. Gritty, stunned, alarmed. Who the hell is flying that plane? Aria pressed transmit and answered clearly. Valkyrie. Silence. Then another pilot joined in. Then another. And another. But one signal didn't. The control tower screamed, "Who the hell is flying that plane?" The answer was simple. Valkyrie. The call sign rippled through airspace like a storm front rolling over calm water. Valkyrie 12. Once a classified identifier. Once an internal nickname meant to mock her intensity, her sharpness, her refusal to break ranks for comfort. Now it echoed like legend. Inside the commercial cockpit, Aria's fingers moved with practiced mechanical grace across the reactivated Valkyrie command shell. On a second screen, the F-22 fighter jet tethered to her inputs mirrored each adjustment she made to its flight trajectory. Eagle 9 requesting vector sync from Valkyrie. Shadow 6 confirming AI scrub from port 17. Valkyrie 12. We're aligned. Saber Command here, requesting override approval to follow Valkyrie 12's lead. The comms were flooding with voices, military pilots, command officers, even techs from far-flung control towers. Some she recognized, most she didn't. But one thing united them now, her call sign. Every transmission was a pivot in history. These were the same frequencies that once went silent when she walked into the room. Now they called for her by name. Reynolds watched the screens, speechless. He leaned closer to the windshield. One of the Raptors off their left wing released a flare, a silent tribute. A mid-air salute, he whispered. "They're not just responding to you, they're following you." "They always could," Aria said quietly. "They just weren't allowed to." She wasn't talking about protocol. She was talking about culture, about fear, about how power behaves when it's in the hands of someone it was never designed for. Now those same hands had become the only thing keeping this aircraft, and maybe others, alive. Passengers had no visual on what was happening, but word had started to spread in the cabin. Someone up front had heard her name. Someone else whispered the word military. A child asked, "Is that lady flying the plane?" By row 10 it became a quiet chant. Hushed but charged. "Valkyrie." Aria stayed focused. Her voice moved through the channels like a conductor commanding an orchestra, redirecting autopilot data into ghost scrub mode. "Stand by, Eagle 9. Shadow 6. Adjust altitude drift by 2 degrees south. Tethering your lag vector now." Saber Command chimed in again. "We've activated your old crownstone logs, Valkyrie 12. They're holding." Then, the screen pulsed red. She froze. A new aircraft had entered the area. No transponder, no signal ID. "Fast. Too fast." "What is that?" Reynolds asked. Aria didn't answer at first. She zoomed in the radar. The object was flying at Mach 1-9, aggressively, direct trajectory toward them. But it wasn't responding to pings, wasn't showing up on command logs. She traced its code signature. Military grade. American made. But not logged. "Someone's flying hot," she said slowly. Reynolds paled. "A rogue?" Her eyes narrowed. "Not just rogue. Ghosted. It's using a buried protocol, something that was never supposed to launch." The plane shuddered slightly from the sonic wave it rode in on. The passengers jerked in their seats. Some screamed. The cabin lights flickered again. "Does Saber Command see it?" Reynolds asked. "I'm checking." She opened a private line. "This is Valkyrie 12 to Saber Command. Do you copy the unflagged Mach approaching object?" A pause. Then negative. "Our systems show clear." She opened another protocol, manually tracing the ghost jet's path through an AI diagnostic she hadn't touched in a decade. There it was. A line of code she remembered writing. But this one had been altered. Twisted. Rewritten. Aria whispered, "That jet? It's running one of my programs. But someone weaponized it." Outside, a dark shape broke through the clouds. Sleek. Unmarked. Wrong. She opened a final channel. "Unidentified aircraft, you are on a collision trajectory with Flight 21287. Identify and respond. I repeat, identify and respond."
No reply.
She tried again. Harder now. "This is Valkyrie 12. You are on a civilian corridor. Break course or I will intercept." Silence. Reynolds leaned toward her. "What are our options?" Her voice was flat. "Intercept. Or be hit." She began typing in the tether override protocol, something she hoped still worked after all these years. At 2,000 feet and closing, the rogue jet still hadn't blinked. Outside, the other F-22s had begun to widen their flanks, making room for the maneuver they hoped she'd never have to make. The cabin stayed oblivious. Just the usual turbulence screams. Just the sound of trust they had no idea they were giving to a woman they had barely looked at an hour ago. Reynolds spoke again. Is it possible they're not piloted? Could be autonomous? If it's running that code, she replied, then someone is pulling strings, and they wanted me to see it. Reynolds looked her in the eye. You think it's personal? Aria didn't blink. I think it always was. Her hands hovered above the final command. She had written the kill protocol herself. Never thought she'd have to use it, but one fighter jet didn't respond, and it was flying rogue toward them at Mach speed. The world didn't realize it had forgotten her until she reappeared mid-air, 37,000 feet above sea level, with rogue jets circling and the comms channels ablaze. The name Aria St. James wasn't whispered anymore. It was searched, in DC. A junior staffer in a basement analytics lab noticed the spike first. One military-associated Reddit thread, then a tweet, then a cascade of reblogs. Valkyrie 12 is real. She was right all along. Why did the Air Force bury her? By the time the tweets reached 5,000 shares, it had breached the mainstream news filters. News desks started chasing it, fact-checking in real time, confused by the silence in official channels. But the silence was not a failure to respond. It was a protocol, a blackout, one they never expected to need. Inside the plane, Aria continued syncing the fail-safe protocols between her aircraft and the rogue jet, a ghost-piloted weapon built on the very framework she had warned them against nearly 2 decades ago. Every second she stalled, the AI loop gathered more strength. Reynolds spoke beside her. Why are people talking about you? My feed just blew up. She kept her eyes on the screen. Because I never left. They just erased me. The co-pilot finally stirred behind them, eyes blinking open. His oxygen mask hissed. He looked around, dazed.
What the hell is going on?
Aria didn't answer him. Instead, she clicked into a buried archive folder, embedded in the Valkyrie firmware. One final file, labeled, It Had Never Been Played, encrypted voice memo. She had recorded it 17 years ago during the final week before her dishonorable discharge. You can't play that, Reynolds warned. You don't know who's listening. Exactly why I have to, she replied. She entered her old clearance code. The console hesitated, then unlocked. The voice that played wasn't her present one. It was younger, more idealistic, worn down, but not broken yet. If you're hearing this, they won. They took everything. My rank, my name, my flight status. But they didn't take my truth. The program we developed, they're weaponizing it. Not for defense, for control. There is no accountability, no oversight. And if I vanish, it won't be by accident. I built Valkyrie to stop this. If you're hearing me now, it's already in motion. You have to finish what I started. The cockpit went silent. Reynolds looked at her, stunned. They knew. Aria didn't blink. They always knew. Down below, CNN was running her story live. Archival footage, grainy stills, Senate hearing clips. A segment headlined, The Black Woman Who Warned the Air Force, and was erased. At the Pentagon, panicked whispers flew between secured rooms. People who once said her name like a curse were now saying it like a headline. The rogue jet outside tilted again. A new signal flashed across Aria's screen. Incoming decryption, level black, clearance. The message, the final audio memo from her original investigation, the one she had never been able to access. It had just been auto-decrypted by her override protocol, and the final classified voice message she'd recorded years ago, it had just been decrypted. The wheels kissed the tarmac with a soft but weighted thud. It wasn't the kind of landing that won applause. It was the kind that summoned silence. Heavy, thick, reverent. Inside the cabin, not a single passenger cheered. They didn't clap. They didn't exhale. They watched. For the first time in hours, everything was still, except for her. Aria St. James remained seated in 12F, her hands resting gently in her lap, her gaze fixed straight ahead. She hadn't spoken since issuing the final override. The rogue fighter jet had diverted. The AI corruption neutralized. The system she built to protect had finally been used for its purpose. Not control, not containment, protection. Captain Reynolds unbuckled his seat harness and looked back toward the cabin. Toward her. Aria, he said barely above a whisper. You saved 200 people. And half the eastern airspace. She didn't reply. She wasn't looking for thanks. She was waiting. The aircraft rolled slowly to a halt on a remote landing strip, far from the main terminal. This was no accident. They'd been directed there. Isolated, contained, but no longer for suspicion. Now, for something else entirely. Out the window, rows of ground crew, emergency vehicles, news vans, and military staff stood poised, tense, unsure. No one moved toward the plane. They didn't need to, because two shadows cut across the air above them. Two F-22 Raptors banked low overhead and began descent. Their engines screamed like thunder across the tarmac, powerful and commanding. The same jets that once flanked her flight now returned, not as escorts, not as threats, but as acknowledgement. Everyone looked up. Passengers craned their necks. Reporters turned their cameras skyward. The jets touched down, perfectly synchronized. Their wheels met the ground with precision, born of training, but their presence now spoke something deeper. Respect. A salute not yet given, but already earned. Aria stood from her seat and made her way down the aisle. This time no one dared look through her. They looked at her. Every eye in the plane followed. As she passed row 9, a young woman barely out of high school whispered, "Thank you." Row 6. An elderly man pressed a hand to his heart. Row 3. A child said softly, "She's the one who flew." She stepped off the plane into sunlight, and for a brief second, the world seemed to pause. Cameras clicked. News anchors whispered her name, uncertainly at first, as if it were forbidden. But it wasn't forbidden anymore. It was free. Behind her, Reynolds stepped down, shielding his eyes. "Look," he murmured. The two fighter jets had taxied to a stop nearby. Their cockpits opened. The pilots emerged, removing their helmets slowly, deliberately. They stepped onto the tarmac in tandem. Young men, both in standard-issue suits, faces tight with emotion. They didn't speak. They stood, at attention, and then together they raised their hands and saluted her. Not the flight, not the aircraft, her. Aria St. James, Valkyrie, the one who had been dismissed, silent, buried. Now her name echoed, not in secrecy, but in reverence.
The media broadcasted live.
Crowds behind barricades cheered, then quieted. The world had questions about protocol, about military oversight, about the AI weapon system, but none of that mattered in this moment, because in that small corner of the runway, history bowed its head. The woman the sky once rejected was now the one it saluted. And she didn't need to say a word, because her name had already flown. They climbed out of their jets, removed their helmets, and stood at attention, saluting the black woman in 12. They silenced her because she didn't look like power was supposed to. They erased her because the truth made them uncomfortable. But when everything was on the line, only she had the answer. If you believe the world must stop discarding brilliance just because it's black, type yes. If you believe in justice, subscribe if this broke your heart.